So rare that I do this, but this is actually a fresh out of the theater review. I just got into my car after watching Firestarter 2022. Now, I don't know if you'd technically call this a remake. I mean, it was made as a movie once before in 1984, but before that it was a Stephen King novel. So based on the book by Stephen King, we have Firestarter, starring Zac Efron as the father of the young girl who has the ability to set things ablaze with her mind. This was directed by the director of a movie called The Vigil that I saw about a year ago and really enjoyed. And sort of a big step up from that. That was a very contained, spooky, sort of more or less one or two character movie that really, really worked on your nerves. And this is a much bigger cast with special effects and a whole lot of fire going on. Great balls of fire. And so I read the book of Firestarter when I was a kid. And I really liked it. It was a very sad, tragic story headed toward an inevitable, unhappy ending. For some of the characters, at least. And I eventually saw the Drew Barrymore film, probably on cable, probably on HBO. And I remember thinking it was okay, but wow, the book was better. That was one of the early realizations as a kid, was reading Firestarter and Dead Zone and Christine. And 2 out of the 3 of those, the movies never came close to how good the books were. And that's when I realized you can't really put everything in the book into a movie. That's why now you see a lot of limited series on cable that do a better job at translating what's on the page to the screen, at least in terms of being close to the original material. But a movie can't be that long, so it has to be an hour and a half. So the new Firestarter is what we're talking about here. I went into it thinking it looked not good. I don't find sinister kids effective or creepy in movies. They tend to just seem like a kid trying really hard to do this business, and it doesn't really affect me. The girl in this was actually quite good. I was surprised. I went in thinking that the Drew Barrymore portrayal was going to have the edge because she felt less like she was acting and more like she was really that little girl in that movie. This movie, young Charlie, the titular Firestarter, she's more of an actress, but she's good. She doesn't overdo it. There are times when she's sinister and giving the roar and giving with the fireballs that it felt a little silly, a little forced to me. But overall, the story basically is this family. The parents were in college, involved in some kind of government experiment voluntarily, where they took some experimental drug that wound up giving them psychic powers. The mother apparently got pyrokinesis, and the father got what he calls the push, because in a Stephen King novel, he can never call anything what it is. He has to come up with some silly name for it. So it's the push, which is basically a way to it's the Jedi mind trick, basically. These are not the droids you're looking for. Basically, Zac Efron has that ability, but it comes with a price, he says. Like, his eyes bleed. It comes with a very visual price for all concerned. And so young Charlie was born with the ability to create fire with her mind when she's emotionally upset or angry or unbalanced. And you see as she's growing into her like middle school years, it's coming out more and more often. And what do the parents do about that? Well, what they do is try to teach her to not use it, and try to teach her to not raise any awareness of her or their family, because they're on the run from the people who had done the experiments on them originally. So it's a cat and mouse movie to a degree. It's a coming of age movie to a small degree. It's a horror movie to a degree. You could call it, they refer to her as a superhero once or twice in the movie, people who are trying to be nice to her. So it's that to a degree. Probably this movie works best if you've never read the book and you've never seen the other movie, because I did find myself, while both are sort of fuzzy in my mind, I did sort of keep comparing it. I think the Native American assassin who's sent out to reclaim Charlie for the bad guys was portrayed by George C. Scott in the original film. Not a Native American, in case you weren't aware, but arguably a more compelling performance than what we get in this. In this film, we do have a Native American actor who's good at being a stone cold killer, but doesn't have sort of the gravitas and the range that George C. Scott had in the original film. And Zac Efron is fine for what he is and what he does in this movie, but remembering, and it's not really fair to do this, but remembering David Keith's performance in the original, it was much more tragic and tortured to me. For this, it's just, I always say Hollywood remakes, they cast everybody younger and hotter. And instead of grizzled, old, stout George C. Scott, you get a svelte, younger Native American assassin. And instead of, you know, marginally stocky David Keith in the original film, you get buff Zac Efron. You see how it goes. So maybe it was a little distracting. Maybe he was a little too pretty for me to sell how tortured he was being the father of this little girl who had a blessing and a curse and was always going to be the target of somebody. But for me, I went to see this as literally a Saturday matinee as I record this, and it was an okay Saturday matinee. Didn't make me mad. I wasn't bored. The score by John Carpenter, kind of interesting, which sounds like any kind of John Carpenter score in the background. Nothing like a Halloween or an Escape from New York with any kind of theme that really jumps out at you that you remember, but it has that synth vibe that a lot of people are liking to go back to now. Otherwise, I not saying the original 84 Firestarter was brilliant by any stretch, but like all remakes, this is destined to be forgotten. It's just the way it is. There's damn few remakes that rise above mediocrity or paling in comparison to the original. And I was ready for a movie to be better than the 84 Firestarter because it's not brilliant. You know, I think there still could be a better audiovisual representation of that book that sells the sorrow and the sadness and the strife and the terror and the thrills more than either of the original films did. I still feel like my memory of the original, which is never a film I've held particularly dear, I feel like the original has the edge over the remake. It was nice to see what at least appeared to be real fire in this movie. I was really nervous it was all going to be CG fire. There are close-up shots where the little girl Charlie is letting loose with the fire scream, and that is clearly, there's a little rippling heat effect here and there is digital, but for the most part it looked like real fire, which was kind of cool. But it wasn't very dynamically shot to me. Everything was shot a little too close. Not the worst aspects of what I call the disease, but still a lot of it I felt like could have, maybe it was just not an expensive film to make. I really don't know. At any rate, in theaters now, for now, is the 2022 version of Stephen King's Firestarter.